As energy bills bite harder than ever, is the government's great energy gamble working?
If you're spending 10% of your disposable income and someone slaps on another 20% price increase, right, what do? You can't invent the money.
What fate awaits the increasing number of people already struggling to keep the cold at bay?
I'm really scared about this coming winter because if it is really cold, what do we do? Do we put the heating on and not eat properly?
Ministers blame forces beyond their control. Profit-hungry companies and world gas prices.
So why is the government so hooked on these? One of the most expensive ways of generating electricity.
And we uncover the strange tale of how Tony Blair saddled us with a very hefty bill.
Perhaps he saw it as an important, big gesture, but maybe lost track of the details, such as the tens of billions of pounds that this was going to cost UK consumers.
Tonight, what is really fueling your bill? Profit or policy? We are power hungry. Day and night we depend on energy to feed our economy and run our homes. But the bill for that vital spark is higher than ever. On average costing £1,345 per household every year. So, is this price hike a painful blip or the start of an agonising trend? To answer, we'll need to reach behind the switch to understand the mechanics of the energy business and how politicians are dictating its future. But first, it's getting chilly in Coventry. Paula McCrudden lights the fire as usual, but it brings her little comfort.
A few years back, how much did you worry about energy bills then?
I didn't. I honestly didn't give it a second thought. The bill used to come, pay it, not a problem. You know, those days have gone forever. It's a fear that you're going to get into trouble. You either have your heating on and cut way back on the food, which we've already cut back on, or you don't have the heating on and have a little bit extra for food.
Paula is officially in fuel poverty, as more than 10% of her income is spent on fuel. She's one of over 6 million households in the same predicament, the number rising daily.
What I do is, if I can cook 2 things in the oven, say today's dinner, say it's a pie or something, and a stew, put them in at the same time so I don't have to put the oven on again tomorrow. You have to think of all sorts of ways to, you know, just to sort of cut back.
Paula tries hard to reduce her bills, monitoring her electricity usage online. She's also shopped around for the best deals and even made her home more energy efficient. But still, things have got so bad, she's even changing her winter wardrobe.
What do we got here?
This is my winter wear. This is my little furry boots that I wear around the house to keep me warm. And this is what I call my snuggly, which you sort of put on. And it leaves your arms free, it wraps around you basically.
Not the highest of fashions, perhaps.
No, not really.
But essential in your view.
Yes, yeah, I'd rather look silly than get cold, yeah. Yeah.
While we may shiver, parts of the economy quake in fear at high energy prices. This is Steelite, one of the few surviving potteries in Stoke. They make robust crockery for hotels and cruise liners, most of them abroad.
The major consumer of energy is kilns. Obviously you need to fire the kilns at high temperatures in order to form them into the vast array that you can see around here.
How closely do you keep an eye on the cost of energy?
This business checks our energy prices every single morning without fail, because it's so important. It's a huge cost to the company. It's over £2.5 million. We need to keep a very close eye on it.
But their success in creating both exports and jobs could be shattered by the fuel bill.
This industry, this city, has lost lots of companies over the years. They continue to go, and unless the conditions are right, that will continue to happen.
The government appears keen to deflect anger over price rises towards energy companies.
It's simply not fair that big energy companies can push their prices up for the vast majority of their consumers.
We are making them be competitive. We're going to make they're permanently being watched by Ofgem to make sure it is a competitive market, and we are making them make that.
But their policy actions commit us to a hefty price tag. A massive switchover to homegrown low-carbon energy, more protected from global fuel price swings. But it is a gamble, playing with new technology, international markets and our energy habits at home. One thing's for certain though, up front it's perilously expensive. And it's racking up our bills. At stake is £200 billion of our money, which will be spent to revolutionise the way we power our lives. Primarily less dirty coal and more clean wind. If we spin forward to 2020, the government wants electricity from renewables like wind and solar to jump from 7 to 30% of output. But here's the problem. The traditional power generators, which are being cut back, are cheap, costing £78 per megawatt hour to feed into the grid. Whereas electricity from the favoured new sources like offshore wind costs £170, more than double that amount. And who'll have to find the money? We all will. Much of it spent around the coast, on hardware at sea and jobs on the land. So I went to Grimsby with Sarjit Sambi from Centrica, the UK's biggest energy generator. Offshore generation has two big advantages. The wind blows stronger and local objections are weaker, as nobody lives there. Centrica has these two wind farms off the Lincolnshire coast, and they're not small.
Two wind farms combined cover an area of about 50 square kilometres. That's about 6,000 football pitches, so it's a vast area. Each turbine, they're about 130 metres from sea level to tip height. And to put that in perspective, London Eye's about 120 metres, so they'd overshadow it somewhat.
I think offshore wind is pretty unique in the renewables family in the UK. It's a technology where you can see how you can engineer the cost down over time. It's a technology that takes advantage of our very significant skills and capabilities in terms of offshore engineering. And at the end of the day, we also have a great natural resource around the UK Isles that we can develop and exploit.
Britain leads the world in offshore wind. Building turbines is pricey, wind is free, but there's still maintenance. The total cost is high.
Offshore wind is eye-wateringly expensive, and against all government forecasts that those costs were going to fall over the years, actually the cost of offshore wind keeps on going up.
Even the former government's chief scientific advisor and Tony Blair's climate change guru has concerns.
Offshore wind is extraordinarily expensive, and I would say that we need to move cautiously down that route. There are days in the winter across the whole of the British Isles when there is effectively no wind to drive the turbines. So wind turbines always have to be duplicated by gas-fired turbines which can be switched on and off to cover these days of stillness.
Alongside the existing turbines here, you can see some new stubs growing out of the sea, and that's where the new blades are going to be. And to give you an idea of the government's ambition, they're going to need 4 new fields like this every year, each year, for the next 10 years, if they're going to hit their target.
And to make this happen, they need the energy companies.
There is no such thing as easy energy anymore. Before, we had a very simple concept of producing energy at the absolute lowest cost. Today, we have multiple objectives. We need to maintain security of supply. We need to reduce carbon emissions. Ultimately, the £200 billion of investment will feed through to consumer bills.
But could the energy industry pay more? The regulator Ofgem recently reported rising profit margins across the sector. Centrica made nearly £1.3 billion in the first half of this year. On top of that, the Energy Secretary has accused the Big Six generators of predatory pricing.
What do you make of Chris Huhne's accusations that there's predatory pricing going on?
That is absolutely something that cannot be substantiated. We don't do it. Since 2001, 17 inquiries, all giving the UK energy industry a clean bill of health.
The government knows wind technology will stall unless energy companies can make good money. So Chris Huhne has a difficult balancing act, talking tough for the public, but tender for the boardroom.
I'm going to be on the side of the consumer, making sure that there is no excess profit in there. But obviously, they're not the Salvation Army. They have to make a respectable return in a free and competitive market.
So where might bills be in the next few years? Well, Chris Huhne would get very long odds indeed on his department's prediction that your fuel payments could actually drop by the end of the decade. In fact, they're on their own.
Predictions are fogged by unknowns, but the government's most recent forecast says your combined gas and electricity bill in 2020 will be £1,239, just over £100 lower than today. But city analyst Citigroup think that total could be up to 50% higher, reaching £2,000. Research by uswitch.com suggests we'll be paying an average of £3,202 by 2020, a near tripling of your current bill. Whatever the precise level of your future bills, one reason for their acceleration skyward is fairly straightforward. Sadly, green energy isn't yet cheap energy, and we are all now paying for the scientists' demands and the politicians' promises on climate change. And one promise in particular lies behind the wind rush, which some believe was a multi-billion-pound gaffe. It was taken in 2007 by Tony Blair in Brussels, just 3 months before he stood down.
This was a decision made at a meeting of the heads of states of the European Union in Brussels. And Tony Blair was a very keen advocate of action for climate change.
On the table was Britain's commitment to renewable power by 2020. A senior civil servant we've spoken to says Blair was advised that 15% of renewable electricity was the maximum we could manage. But he emerged having signed a radically different promise. He virtually tripled the challenge by agreeing to 15% of all energy being renewable, now including heating for homes and factories, fuel for cars and trucks and trains, on top of electricity. In short, everything that uses power.
The expectation before we went into the meeting that day was that we would be aiming for 15% not on energy but on electricity on the grid.
My role in the Treasury was to try and bear down on the costs of energy policies, both for the taxpayer and for the consumer. And suddenly the game seemed to change.
All I know is there was a meeting that carried on till 2 or 3 in the morning. Very tired people in the meeting, and perhaps there was an argument about whether it should be electricity on the grid or total energy, or it could have been that people just took their eye off the ball.
When the official we've spoken to heard Tony Blair had committed to the higher energy target, he was astonished.
Perhaps he saw it as an important big gesture, but maybe lost track of the details, such as the tens of billions of pounds that this was going to cost UK consumers.
You think it's possible that it was actually a gaffe, in effect?
It could have been. It could have been. But was it a bad gaffe? Well, at the time, for me, it was quite a big surprise. Is it a good target? It may well be a good target.
Tony Blair's office told us it wasn't a gaffe, but a decision to protect the environment and help energy security. Mistake or masterstroke, it is now part of a pricey target.
Our estimates of how much needs to be spent to hit the target is about £25 billion a year. That's 1 1/3 Crossrails a year, 2.5 Olympic Games a year, 2.5 times the budget of NASA. In fact, we could sort of say goodbye to windmills and launch our own Mars mission if we wanted to for the same amount of money.
Back on Earth, here's what passes for mission control in the quest to rewire Britain. Well, the information on this screen is becoming increasingly important. It shows the weather and particularly the wind speed across the country. However it's generated, National Grid's job is to make sure there's always power behind the switch. And this is the second big element fueling your rising electricity bill. £17 billion to wire up the changing network. Alan Smart from National Grid is paid to make sure our tellies, toasters and kettles keep running.
For a conventional generator, you know when it's going to start generating, you know how quickly it's going to increase its output. With wind, it's when the wind arrives, and it's when the wind changes, and it's when the wind goes away.
And there's another problem with new forms of power: geography.
Traditionally, the power stations have been in the centre of the country. New power stations, new nuclear power stations around the coast, wind farms offshore, all of that power is coming at the edge of the power system. And we've got to transport that power reliably to the centres of demand.
That means more of these. The National Grid is planning 214 miles of pylons spread through many parts of the country, from Suffolk to Cumbria. Down in the Somerset Levels, the steel giants will stride through an area of outstanding natural beauty. The new nuclear reactor at Hinkley Point is pointless without connection to the grid. And this consequence of our energy revolution is not only expensive, but ugly, triggering a fierce backlash.
You care about the environment, you care about the countryside, and you care about the next generation. And we don't want to leave them a landscape despoiled by pylons.
These protesters, like many communities facing new pylon runs, want the cables underground.
In the end, this sounds like a classic, you don't want this in your view. It couldn't be more not in my backyard.
No, this is a totally national issue. This is coming across the whole of the country. What we want to do is do that in the way which is right for the 21st century.
And by right, you mean invisible, in effect, don't you?
Yeah, put them out of sight. We do that with our water mains, we do that with our gas mains, why not with electricity?
National Grid described their position on burying cables as neutral, and they're still consulting with the local community. But they want people to be aware that undergrounding will cost us all.
Well, for this power line through Somerset, to underground it in its entirety would cost around £1 on every domestic consumer's bill for the next 40 years. You're talking about £100 million as opposed to £1 billion underground. £1 billion's an awful lot of money.
So now we have two steps to higher bills: pricey green energy, costly cables. And here's the third. A quarter of our power stations are so old they need replacing, including this nuclear plant at Hinkley Point.
So how far beneath my feet is the actual hot stuff?
Yeah, we're about 10 to 15 metres beneath here.
Right.
So that's where the nuclear reaction is taking place.
It's a strange mix of the high-tech and quite old, isn't it? You look around, you see the telephones and things. They look like out of a period drama, some of those, don't they?
But over the 35 years, the important nuclear safety-related equipment has been constantly refurbishing.
Atomic energy is virtually zero carbon, fitting with modern aspirations. So the government wants 8 new nuclear power stations. But attracting the money to build them won't be easy.
Nuclear power carries a set of unique risks. It carries an extraordinarily high construction risk, a high safety risk, as we've just witnessed from Fukushima. So we have an accident due to an earthquake and a tsunami in Japan, and in Germany they decide to instantly close a whole set of nuclear power stations. And that means it's very, very difficult to price that risk, and therefore very difficult for investors to get involved.
Yet, despite these high potential costs and existing controversy, nuclear power is gaining support, even from the Green Wing, if a little grudgingly.
I don't actually like nuclear power, and I would much rather we didn't have to have nuclear power. But the problem is that I like the alternatives even less. And it's become very clear to me that much as I dislike nuclear power, if we don't replace our nuclear power stations, we will have no option but to invest in more fossil fuel.
The government is proposing a guaranteed price for nuclear. It's a sweetener to encourage building so they meet their carbon-cutting targets. We'll pay for the sugar, but do we know that?
The government can't be passive about any of this. If it's going to invest heavily in new wind, it's going to have to make the political case for it. If it's going to invest heavily in new nuclear, it's going to have to make the political case for it. It can't pretend that it can just drift along and expect people to accept stuff when they're not being told why it's a good idea to accept it.
So, is the government in denial about the heavy burden their policies will put on consumers?
You are reducing the production from the cheaper sources of electricity, and government policy is going to increase production from the more expensive. Well, that is a fact, isn't it?
It's not a fact, because the key thing, if that was...
It is a fact. I mean, the figures are from your report.
It's not a fact, because the key point is it's not just now that we have to worry about. When you make investments in energy, you're making investments for 10, for 20, for 30 years. What I can say, and give the assurance, is that at any given point, the total effect of government policies, including the energy saving reduction, is going to be to make sure bills are lower than they would otherwise be.
That's a promise,
but overall, it's an assurance that we can give, because we will make sure at each point that that's the case.
So, on that vexed issue of future energy bills, let's look at what we've been dealt. Well, first off, 3 of a kind. The high cost of low carbon, the huge expense of power station rebuild, and pricey pylons to hook them all up. But Chris Huhne says he's also got a couple of aces up his sleeve. Policies to help us save energy, and also to protect us against soaring global fuel prices. But is all that really going to be enough to make our energy affordable? There is room for most homes to save energy and money, but enough to offset the price hikes? This is the Boaty family of St Albans.
I've started to become the grumpy old man. I go around turning the lights off and everything, and having to go at the children for leaving things on, sort of coming back and saying, "Oh, the house is lit up like a, Christmas tree." Christmas tree.
Well, lovely wood.
In fact, Paul's become so switched on about minimising his heating bill, he's taken fuelling the house into his own hands.
We take the dog for a walk in the woods, then we just pick up suitable pieces of wood lying down, bring it back, and we use that to burn in the winter. This would be a nice piece to have.
Yeah, saves the money. It's free. It's
It's
here lying in the woods.
Yeah, it's just here lying around.
At home, alongside the woodpile, they've lagged the loft, double glazed, and dwell in sofa sleeping bags. But even that's not enough.
How are you finding paying your bills at the moment, your energy bills?
Well, I think we're finding it's becoming increasingly a struggle.
Yes.
A concern, I think. And I think the days of cheap energy and things are over. And the sooner everybody realises it, and we start planning for that, the better.
Stealing ashore under the cover of darkness is the other threat Chris Huhne is pledging to fight. Pricey foreign gas. He says we'll need less if we grow our own green power.
One challenge is to get us in a position where we're less vulnerable to the sort of big price increases for oil and gas that we've seen over the last year. If we can get to a situation where we're using less energy and the energy that we are using is coming from renewable and nuclear sources rather than just from fossil fuels, then we're going to be less vulnerable to that sort of buffeting.
On this tanker is liquefied natural gas from Qatar.
Now the ship has safely docked, they can begin piping off the gas, which at this stage is still a super-cooled liquid, actually flowing through these pipes. It'll take about 24 hours to discharge the whole vessel before the gas flows off down those pipes. And there's enough in here to heat nearly 5 million homes for a week.
But could Chris Huhne's foe turn out to be more friendly in the future?
There are good reasons to think that the gas and even perhaps the oil price may well fall. That's good news for customers. But if we're pushing out of those areas, particularly out of gas, into a crash course on wind, given the costs of that wind, the bills are going to go up a lot.
But wouldn't dashing back into gas mean abandoning our climate change goals? Not according to accountancy firm KPMG, who explain in a report out this week that by moving rapidly from coal to gas and growing wind more slowly, we could hit our carbon targets but save the public £34 billion, saving the world for less.
We need to get to a position where we can look consumers in the eye and say, we have spent the least amount of money possible to give you power, while still also doing the things we need to do for the benefit of all around carbon and around renewables targets. And I think our research would indicate that there is a gap there, that actually we could spend less money, and therefore I'm not sure we could look the consumers in the eye right now and honestly say we're spending the least amount possible that we need to.
But the man orchestrating the gamble isn't blinking.
Government policy overall, taking the low carbon and energy saving policy, will have a lowering effect on bills. Now, bills may go up because of world market prices, because of the need for investment, all the rest of it, but the overall effect of government policy will be to lower bills compared with what would happen otherwise.
In my view, the government are storing up tremendous problems for themselves unless they are entirely open, entirely honest with consumers about what this is costing today and what it'll be costing in 5, 10 and 20 years' time. Because it seems to me that the consumers will not pay these higher bills unless they fully understand what's being spent, why it's being spent.
The government's next chance to be straight with bill payers like Paula McCrudden and the Boaty family comes this month in the Energy Statement, which includes a forecast of future bills.
How do the policymakers think that sitting around in a house where you're spending 10% of your income on gas and electricity to heat your house, that you're going to be happy with another X% on top of that? How are they going to cope? Who's going to pay for that? These are real life problems for ordinary people.
As public anger rises, politicians feel the heat. With the stakes now so high, will the government still back its great energy gamble?
Lord Sugar says it with flowers when it comes to the latest task. Young Apprentice continues next on BBC One. Brand new for BBC Two, Choirmaster Gareth Malone is out to work his musical magic on a group of military wives. BBC Three now has the true story of the growing pains of a teenage maths genius.